It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Tali and Emra for the invitation and everyone else for joining. I'm just going to quickly share my slides so that we can see them. Let me know, please, if you can see them now. Is that okay? Excellent. I see thumbs up. Thank you. So I'm very lucky that this talk follows on from the last month's lunch talk by Danny Stone, where he provided an overview of gender-based abuse in the context of antisemitism and in the context of the UK. And what I'd like to focus on today is specifically misogyny, specifically the language in which it's expressed, and how it happens online these days, and how the intersectional approach to discourse to that language can be valuable. And to this end, I'm first going to talk briefly about the project I'm currently involved in and how its methodology and aims have sort of taken me in the direction of intersectional approach to discourse, and where we could take it further beyond the project as well. So the project I'm involved in is called Decoding Antisemitism, as Tali already mentioned. It's based at the Technical University in Berlin, funded by Alfred Landecker Foundation. And broadly speaking, in most general terms, what we do is we monitor mainstream media. Whenever a media story occurs that triggers more antisemitism in the comment section, so reactions from web users, we try to identify that and analyze it. And we do it for 3 countries: Germany, the UK, and France. I'm on the UK team, and as it was already said, my background is in linguistics and political sciences, but on the team there are also people who specialize in the other countries' discourses and in other fields, so for example, history of antisemitism or media studies or theory of discourse. So we try to bring kind of a comprehensive view to online antisemitism in order to make it as full as possible, to make the analysis as complete as possible. And the way we do it is primarily qualitative analysis. So basically, as I mentioned, whenever we identify that media story and we see that there are comments with a spike in antisemitism, we take those comments and we analyze them manually, basically. So we look at each of them separately. We've analyzed this way over 80,000 comments. I think, to be honest, it's more now because we continue with the analysis, but that's the latest round figure. And we annotate each of them according to our classification system. And in that classification system, we look at the concepts in the comments. So first we have to decide, is it anti-Semitic or not? If it's anti-Semitic, what specific anti-Semitic concept or concepts are there? So it could be something classic like Jewish greed or the alleged Jewish influence over the media. Or it could be something a bit later, so the so-called secondary anti-Semitism, so things like Holocaust denial or instrumentalization of anti-Semitism, or concepts related to Israel, which are sort of less than 100 years old. But we also look at the linguistic level. So very often when we think about hate speech online, we think about things like death threats or insults, but actually in the content that we look at, which is already moderated and in the mainstream. So we look at, websites of mainstream news and how the comments people left there, or on the official social media accounts of those media outlets. So things like BBC News and their official Twitter account. So it's not dark corners of the internet. So when we look there, a lot of the worst stuff has been moderated out, but what has been left is things that is a bit harder to catch. So a lot of it is presented through humor, jokes, wordplay, through metaphors, through irony. These are the common mechanisms or sort of strategies that we see. So a lot of it is implicit, and that will play a part in the examples I will show you later. And as I said, we do all of that manually, but we do have software to help us, content analysis software called MaxQDA. Perhaps some of you are familiar with it, to make it more systematic and a bit quicker. And this is a screenshot from the MaxQDA software work in progress. So on the left-hand side, you see the column with our classification system, a fraction of it, because the whole system has, I think, about 150 categories and subcategories. And on the right, you see the common thread we are analyzing, anonymized, of course, and those colorful brackets are the annotations. So what I mentioned before, is it anti-Semitic? What concepts are there? What linguistic sort of tools have been used? So this was how we do it, but there are also two more steps to the methodology, which I'm less involved in. So there is the supervised machine learning and quantitative analyses. The last one is going to start in a few months, so we may be able to tell you more in a few months on this, on things like statistics and overall sort of quantitative trends. But the machine learning has already started with the help of our data scientist collaborators. We collaborate with a couple of institutions, so King's College London, Hate Lab in Cardiff, but also most closely at the moment with HTW in Berlin, where our data science collaborators take the data we have annotated, so the human annotated comments, and they use it to teach algorithms to do the same job better. So, of course, moderation online using algorithms, using artificial intelligence is already happening, but it's still letting through quite a lot of the anti-Semitic content, especially that implicit stuff I mentioned before. So we are hoping that it can be done more precisely. So this was how we do it. Now, why we do it? Well, first of all, we want to provide insights into what anti-Semitism looks like, what it might look like in the future, and how we could contribute to preventing it. And for this reason, we want to share it with the research community, but also outside of it. So, for example, with educators, as I mentioned before, hopefully improve automated detection of it online. And this project ends in April next year, and we're hoping to start a follow-up project which will extend focus both geographically and to other areas. So watch this space. One last thing about the project, I mentioned that we want to spread the word, so we do it through events like this one, but also through online workshops we're planning and through various publications. And the research I'm talking about today is going to form a chapter of an anthology we're planning. So if you're interested, please check our website in the future and there'll be more information. But what I want to focus the most, of course, today is the research itself. So in the media stories I mentioned before, which we identify as triggering anti-Semitic reactions in comment sections online, very often we have noticed the media story has a person at the center, and very often it's a well-known person. So there might be various reasons for why people are sort of reacting more strongly to a media story with a person in the middle. It could be that, it's less abstract, so it's easier for us to feel emotionally engaged and want to express our opinion on it in a comment section. And very often also, if these people are already famous, they already have a fan base and they're critics who also come to those comment sections to comment on the media story, even if they wouldn't, for example, read that publication normally. So far we've analyzed, I think, about 7 or 8 such media stories where there's the person at the center. One example is Kanye West. I'm sure a lot of you know the name and might be familiar with his anti-Semitic statements last October, which were very widely covered, and I think across various countries, not just in the UK or the USA where it happened. So this is one example of how that happens. And it so happens that so far only one of the people has been in the stories we have analyzed has been a woman, and that person was Sally Rooney. Again, less known than Kanye West, so I don't know how familiar you are with her and her work. Sally Rooney is a novelist, an Irish novelist, extremely popular in the UK. She's been translated to various languages, and her most recent novel was published, I think, in 2021. And in October of that year, she announced her decision not to grant translation rights to an Israeli publisher. And she explained her decision with her support for the BDS movement, so the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement against Israel, sort of based on political grounds. And because she aligned herself with that movement, this was first of all very widely covered in the UK. There was a very lively debate in the comment sections as a result, and there were a lot of accusations of anti-Semitism in comment sections. And a lot of those accusations crossed into criticism of her as a person, and a lot of those criticism crossed into misogyny. Now, this is not unusual, as we know. It's whenever a female figure is at the center of a, is in the public eye, there is a lot of attention on her and a lot of criticism. So this was not unusual. But the language that was used was a bit different to what we saw in other cases where the central figure was identifying as male. And it drew my attention because I am interested in the language of misogyny. And I thought, how interesting would it be to compare this case where we have a female figure who is not Jewish with another case where the female figure is Jewish, and see if the language is the same or different. Also, here, the people who were using misogynistic language were interestingly using it to criticize her views as anti-Semitic. So it was used in counter speech. So, you could say with good intentions on one hand, but then using another hate ideology to criticize her expression of a hate ideology. So that was quite interesting too, and another reason why I wanted to make a comparison. So when looking for another case study to compare this one to, I had a choice of various female figures, and I wanted to make it as comparable as possible. So I looked for a UK story, and as last lunch talk, Danny Stone's last talk already mentioned, there have been quite a few cases in the recent years in the UK and reported in the media where well-known female figures talked about being targeted by anti-Semitic abuse. A lot of them were politicians, so people like Luciana Berger, Ruth Smith, or Margaret Hodge. All of them are politicians, and they talked about anti-Semitic being targets of anti-Semitic abuse. But in the end, I decided on a slightly different person for various reasons, and I went a couple of years to get that data. I decided on a case study that centered around Rachel Riley. Now, Rachel Riley, again, might not be known outside of the UK, is a very well-known TV show presenter, also an author of a couple of books on mathematics. That's her field of interest and expertise. But most of her career is kind of in the field of entertainment. And she had also spoken against anti-Semitism in the UK, especially in British politics. So she was, and she is Jewish, so she was kind of involved. Even before this case, she had already been vocal about anti-Semitism. And in 2019, so in early 2019, the news came that the next Eurovision contest would be held in Tel Aviv. Again, Eurovision, you're probably familiar with, it's often on the news. And that year it was held in Israel. Some British celebrities signed an open letter in which they called for a boycott of Eurovision because it was held in Israel. And in that letter, they cited, I quote, Israel's systematic violation of Palestinian human rights. A counter letter, a second open letter, was prepared by another group of British celebrities in which they quoted the cultural boycott movement being an affront to both Palestinians and Israelis. And they talked about how, Palestinians and Israelis who are trying to work towards peace are, being targeted by this as well. So that second open letter was also signed by Rachel Riley. So she positioned herself against the cultural boycott. So I thought it would be interesting to put two of those case studies together because both of them center around the theme of cultural boycott of Israel. In case of Sally Rooney supporting it, in case of Rachel Riley opposing it, in a sort of similar time period, not the same year, but only a couple of years apart. For each of these cases, I'm basing my analysis on around 1,200 comments, 8 threads, so 7 threads from this case and 1 control thread from another, for kind of like to check the balance. I should say that for the Sally Rooney case, we, as a team, we had analyzed more comments in the project for one of the reports we published, and I'm hoping to analyze more for the Riley case as well. So this is preliminary analysis. But in that sample, the level of comments overall was very similar, over 12%, which is fairly normal for the content we have analyzed so far for the UK. That's usually the amount that has slipped through moderation and can be found in our analysis, and it's centered around a common theme. So BDS, which I mentioned before, the BDS movement, and comparing Israel to an apartheid state. So a similar narrative was there in the comment sections. And as I said before, the Rooney case centers on a popular novelist in her late 20s who is not Jewish. The Riley case centers around a few figures, but very often on Rachel Riley, because she's one of the most common, most recognizable names. So very often when that case was reported by the media, her name was either in the headline or sort of the top bit of the article, so very visible in that group of people. So you could say she was at the center there in that case. And she, as I mentioned, is a popular TV show presenter in her early 30s, but is Jewish. And so both of them work in the field of entertainment. They're a similar age, which I mentioned only because it's relevant to misogynistic language. The ageist element is quite a common element of it, so it is relevant for us here. Yes, and then they are so they are fairly comparable, but one is Jewish, one isn't. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you some examples of language I found attacking them, and for each of them I put it into categories and then put those categories together to see if there are similarities or differences. And I start with similarities and then show you a couple of differences too. I should say all examples are authentic but anonymized. There's nothing super extreme, but some of it is unpleasant, so just a little warning. So we start with insults, the most straightforward way to sort of attack someone. And insults against women compared to other genders are either specific words that are not used, in this case in English, that are not used for men ever, or words that are more frequently used about women than other genders. So we've got words like trout, harpy, cow, which you might know are all derogatory terms towards women. And then there are also words such as, or phrases such as silly girl, nasty piece of work, nasty woman, horrid woman. Those words appeared quite a lot. And these, as I said, are words that are more often used about women than other genders of people. And some of them stem from the likability bias, which, again, you might already know about. So there's this idea that women, compared to other people, are more often expected to be likable, approachable, agreeable, so non-problematic, regardless of the context. So whether it's a professional context, whether they're in the public eye, or whether it's in personal life and so on, that's called the likability bias. And that's why women who might, express their views, for example, be more opinionated or more assertive, are then called nasty, bossy, horrible, all those words that kind of signify they are not likable. And then there's also that phrase, silly girl. Again, silly is not reserved for women or female people only, but is more often used about women, and it undermines their intelligence or competence. And also there's a use of word girl for an adult woman, infantilizes them, so kind of dismisses or undermines them. And the second category we're going to look at is all about undermining as well, but in slightly different ways. So what I saw a lot, perhaps that was the most common category, in fact, of that kind of language, was disempowering language. And that's basically comments that were either undermining their words or undermining their achievements, for example, professional achievements, or distracting from that, and again, and in this case, there might be things that are said about other genders too, not just women, but it's the accumulation of it, the frequency of it that is quite kind of visible. So on the one hand, we've got comments such as the one about Sally Rooney on the left, and nobody wanting to be noticed for her inferred virtue signaling. Now, this commenter might not know Sally Rooney, might not have heard about her books, and might not read them, which is fair enough. I haven't read them too, but so objectively speaking, in her field of work, she's not a nobody. She's a successful writer with, I think by the age of 30, she published 3 best-selling novels that are critically acclaimed. So, objectively speaking, not a nobody. So this person's trying to dismiss that. And then on the other hand, we've got Rachel Riley signed the letter, obviously heavyweight. So this ironic idea that she's not a heavyweight, but again, in her field, she's a successful person. So this is kind of trying to tear her down and kind of undermine her achievement in the context of this case. And then one of the ways to undermine women specifically that is very common is distracting from what they do by putting attention to how they look, how they present, in their physical appearance. So we've got examples of that on both sides. Comment about Sally Rooney's teeth, of all things, and then about Rachel Riley not being pretty. So these are not things you would normally see in comments about men. Technically, you could see that, but again, it's highly unlikely, or much more likely with women to see those distracting from the topic by pointing out their appearance. And then another way to undermine women that is very common, and perhaps the most extreme here, is their sexualization. So attributing their actions, their achievements to their sexual behavior. Now, admittedly, for Sally Rooney and the comments on her case, I only found one example, and we could say debatable. If you say it shouldn't be here, I would consider that, because perhaps it's not how it was meant, but there's a possible interpretation there. So one of the comments called her a groupie, which, again, you probably know, a groupie is a person who kind of follows more successful people, usually celebrities, around, hoping to have a relationship with them, usually a sexual relationship. So it could be, could be seen here as this kind of criticism of Sally Rooney being just trying to be interesting by attaching herself to more successful people in her circle. So we've got one of those. And then on the other hand, with Rachel Riley, we've got a much more explicit example that, to be honest, I was surprised that passed through moderation, but there you go. And this is from the control thread, which was about her receiving an award. And this comment makes 2 suggestions. One of them is saying that, she basically suggesting that she can't have got this award for actual work. She got it either as a result of a bribe or as a result of a sexual favor with someone in power. So there you go. So these are the similarities. And then the last slide talks about differences, which were kind of in one specific area, but they were quite striking. And again, there were quite a lot of comments like that. So in the case of Sally Rooney, the portrayal of her across the comments quite consistently, in the critical comments, of course, was that she is naive, stupid, that she can't have possibly, thought about this, the thing that she said herself, and sort of undermining her, again, her intelligence, her competence, just like we saw with that comment, silly girl, a little bit, but in a slightly more developed way. So we've got comments saying that her politics are a laughably naive gesture, stupidity, that she's brainwashed, woke. Woke is an interesting word, by the way, which has had a long history of going from, has been weaponized, basically, just to keep it short. And then on the other hand, with Rachel Rooney, and the narrative about her in a lot of comments was that she knows what she's doing. And in fact, she's manipulating people to achieve her ends. And there were quite a lot of comments that called her a liar, a grifter, a fraudster, just like in the first example there on the right. One of the comments asked, who are you in league with? Now, being in league with is a negative phrase that suggests that you're conspiring with someone. And then there was also a comment that says she raises money for Israeli soldiers to murder children. Now, all three of these comments show common anti-Semitic concepts that we see elsewhere as well. So the idea of being deceitful and lying, the idea of conspiring, being part of a network that is involved in a conspiracy or a lobby, and then the idea of, blood libel, child murder, which has got a very long history in anti-Semitic discourse. So again, we could see those examples not only in the context of a woman and language targeting a woman, but then if we remember that, again, something that Danny Stone talked about in the last lunch talk, if we remember that a lot of the anti-Semitic misogynistic stereotypes are centered around deceitful women, about manipulative, evil women, it is kind of fitting with that portrayal as well, but in a sort of modern iteration. So that's all the examples that we have here for now. So just a couple of closing comments. Of course, these are just 2 case studies, and we could say this is a small sample. I agree, which is why we need more research. But even from this small sample, we can see that misogyny, the language of misogyny, can be weaponized on different sides of the divide, even in the same debate, even in the same cultural context, even in the same period of time. And we already see that from other publications. So, for example, the report Antisemitism and Misogyny, Overlap and Interplay, which was co-authored by Danny Stone, the previous speaker. They mention in the report that often women are a target of the abuse when they stop being a part of the in-group and start being part of an out-group. So the idea of this thing, turning against women, whichever side they are on in a sort of debate. I think it's interesting to look at those similarities and differences and changes, because they can inform us, on the one hand, about the particular struggles of people identifying as female and Jewish, and that has, that's something at the core of some research. And also how it happens online, as in this case, but then how it translates to real life. Because imagine, what kind of direct messages those people are getting on social media. Imagine how they might be treated in real life by people who have this kind of who absorb this normalized, this view of women as normalized. So on the one hand, we've got the unique, specific struggles of people with who identify as both female and Jewish, but then people who might identify only as female or only as Jewish will have some shared struggles with them. So this is a way to also build understanding, and then also accept our kind of unique experiences, and not say that one is more important or another, and give both or all of them visibility. And this approach, this intersectional approach to researching discourse, can be applied to any identity or any combination of identities. So, for example, there's a project talking about Jewish and Muslim women and their abuse online, but we could apply it to any group, big or small. And I think if there are any researchers in the audience considering intersectional approach to discourse, do it. I mean, as I said, we need research in this area, and I'm very excited to see what kind of research we might see in the coming years. So that's all from me for now. Thank you very much. As I said, if anybody's interested in the project more broadly or would like to contact me, please do get in touch. And I'm looking forward to your questions.